Basically, you have throwing. Throwing is something we're going to define as like the intentional losing of games. There are differences between like running it down versus performing poorly versus performing without visibility. So when you have like running it down, we're just going to do like R for running it down. This is generally going to be like explicitly against rules, or it is going to be like a cultural notion or value. Now, I don't generally respect cultural values in that I have a personal value about that, but it could also be a personal value that you just don't enjoy this, or you don't like this, or you don't think people should be inconsiderate to others in that way, and that's all completely fine. Rather than doing it for the culture's sake, and by culture I just mean the culture of a video game or of gamers in general. Moving on from that, you might also have like different reasons to perform poorly, and we're gonna borrow this again. And this might be something to do with someone's like machine, or someone's like internet might be kind of shit, but they might be doing their best to upgrade themselves in life to like fix that. So it's definitely not intentional. So it's not like the intentional losing of games, because there's no intentional to them doing these things that are like subpar decisions. And people don't generally say other people are throwing if that's the case, unless it's like they're intentionally playing like with a worse machine or on like settings that are too high for them. It could also be something like if your friend's on like a American server, but you're like in fucking Vietnam, but you want to play with your homie because that's homie, you might go to that server and you might like have like fucking 300 ping or some shit, and you might significantly lower your chance of performing well because of that. Some people might say like, hey, that's kind of throwing, but then like you're really just playing with your homie. That's kind of the point of the game. Like you're playing for funsies in that context, and And then a lot of people might separate throwing depending on rank, so they might have like some expectation of like how serious you like should treat it. And this is absolutely a cultural thing. If you're like, hey, we're fucking like diamond rank, you need to perform to these stats, you need to like have these interests, you need to care this much about it, whatever the fuck it is. And it's like, well, no, people can still play ranked and not be playing competitively, as it turns out. People might just enjoy that better opponents tend to be in ranked, and therefore might want to play comp. They might not give a shit about the rank. Basically, in quick play, it's largely MMR, but it's a lot looser of an MMR range for the like convenience of getting quicker matches. Whereas in ranked, in most games, not all games, it tends to be the converse of inverse, where you have much longer queues, but much shorter ranges. Whereas in not ranked, it tends to be, much larger range for like a much shorter queue. It tends to be one or the other. There are other things, so there's something, we're gonna control that. It's called HALT, which is hungry, angry, lonely, tired. And the point of HALT is basically if, due to whatever life circumstance, you're a little fuzzy in the head. Maybe you're too angry, you're not thinking clearly. Maybe you're just like tilted. Because tilted is angry, that's part of HALT. Maybe it's throwing to play when you're tilted, Because you're not intentionally losing, you still want to win, you're still trying to win, but you're in a situation of which your probability of winning is lower, and it could be easily preventable, or it could be very difficult to prevent depending on like your emotional awareness and your emotional intelligence and things like that. So it could be like here, it could be there. Who knows? It could be whatever the fuck. Also, HALT is really good for just communication with other people in general, like any social activity. It is something to be aware of. It is a meta consideration that will help you communicate and interact with others really well in life. So that's HALT. There's also things to do with like ableism. So let's say someone can't really see this color, they can't really see yellow, and they're playing Dead by Daylight, and there's a corn map where there's like a lot of yellow things. And then in Dead by Daylight, there's like scratch marks or things that give you information. But if they're also yellow, and like it's kind of hard to differentiate in this scenario, especially when these are like tiny little lines and these giant like fucking blocks. It's hard to count like specific lines and things. So there might be like accessibility features to accommodate that. But then other people might be nearsighted, they might be farsighted, they might be whatever the fuck. They might have processing issues. Where like too much audio fucks with them or not enough audio fucks with them. Audio is a really, really big thing in games, in many games, not all games obviously. Where if you can hear more, you're in a better position to make informed choices. Basically, if you're listening to music, you might be throwing. If you have audio processing issues, you might have a lower probability of winning, but then devs might introduce features to kind of help balance that out, like colorblind modes. So like you can maybe make this fucking like red or purple, so it's easier to see on that yellow, or you might change the colors there and shit like that. Being sick when you play is something that could lower your chances, you know, being hungry, being sick, being whatever the fuck. Having anything to do with your physical health or your mental health could inhibit your probability of playing at your best or winning or making the most informed decisions that you can to try and win. None of these things are throwing because none of them follow the intentional losing of games, because you're still working to win. But in general, we do say like, hey, if you're angry, don't drive. Hey, if you're like fucking drunk, probably don't go into ranked. That's kind of inconsiderate. Probably don't do that. If you have these issues, probably seek either accommodation or don't do a thing that might negatively impact like a culture or a community. Well, that is the case. But we would never look at someone that only has one arm and say, hey, don't play video games. We would never look at someone that has like a processing disorder or other issues and be like, hey, don't play ranked, don't do this, da 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 da. We would never fucking tell them not to enjoy or to try and experience life or find happiness or whatever the fuck because they have some issues. That would be absolutely nonsensical. But often in video games, people say like, oh, you're doing like bad. Like, what the hell's wrong with you? Like, don't play, da da da. Well, why are they doing bad? Are they doing bad because they're trying to win and, you know, there's like a goal and they're trying to get there, but then they accidentally do this because they're trying to get to the win, but they take like a different route that doesn't lead there. They thought it was going to lead there, but then it doesn't. Or is it throwing where they're intentionally going the opposite direction from winning? So you have a difference between running down versus performing poorly. So you have the difference of intentionality, and then there's also performing without visibility. And performing without visibility is when you can provide, you know, like however the fuck much value, like very good value, very, that's supposed to be very good value. You provide best value, very good value, but number two doesn't see it. They're not blind. They're not necessarily vision impaired. Maybe they're also doing good, but maybe you're over here providing value and they're over here doing their own thing providing value, but they don't have like a way to see that you're providing value. They don't have that accessibility. So you could also say some games track stats or they don't track certain stats, and that might mislead people into thinking there is or isn't value in certain ways. So let's say you have like you have damage. You have like participation. Those are too similar. Oh my god. You have damage, you have participation, you have finals, and then there's like other. We're just gonna say oh. I might not even use that. But let's say you have like really, really high damage. It's gonna be like teammate 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever the fuck. Let's say one person has really high damage, they have kind of participations, or maybe they don't, it could be either. And then they have like 0 finals, so that's really bad, it's really bubkiss. Green good, yellow okay, red bad. And then say you have another person and they have like, you know, pretty fucking bubkiss, pretty low damage, whatever the fuck. They have kind of okay participations, and then they have absolutely fucking phenomenal, huge, amazing, legendary finals. So generally, this person in many games would be called like a spammer, or they would be like a DPS, where their goal is to put out a lot of damage, not necessarily get final hits. This person would be more of an assassin, where their goal isn't necessarily damage, it is to get the kills and make sure people die. To translate that damage into something effective. And you would measure an assassin's effectiveness by finals, because they don't necessarily need teammates' help to get them. So their participation might, it should always be at least equal to this. That's just kind of how those numbers work. Hey, it looks like a dick. Anyways, and then the spammer, you would probably judge them not on necessarily having high damage, but on participation to see how useful that damage was. How much of this damage was translated in kills. Because this is probably going to be very large, and this should probably be like proportional to that to some degree. Then there's other ways people could provide value, and we'll give you a huge fucking super amazing person there, and we'll give them like fucking, we'll give them basically nothing. They're all around. They're not doing too much by these stats. Now, most games will tell you the damage you have. They will tell you like your kills or kill participation. Some games will tell you your final hits. Some games won't. So Overwatch won't tell other players how many final hits you got. So if you're playing an assassin and you have low damage, people might like look at this low damage and this kind of okay participation and go, oh yeah, you're not really doing that much. But maybe like all of this participation are final hits and you're doing amazing. Whereas maybe, you know, this DPS, they have super high damage and they have, you know, kind of okay participation. Maybe they actually had really good finals and they were doing everything. Or maybe they didn't have good finals because this assassin is doing their job and they're making sure people get dead from their damage. And the DPS is just essentially softening them up for the assassin. Anyways, so we're going to say there's a third teammate, and this teammate is going to be a diver. And diver is going to differentiate from DPS, and they're going to differentiate from assassins, in that they don't necessarily need to get a lot of final hits in order to provide value. The other value that they can get, the other value is going to be in distractions, it's going to be in objective time, it's going to be in disrupting the enemy compositions. So, for example, if you are playing, you know, whoever the fuck, like a Shaco, and you use your clone, and that clone goes in, and that enemy team, 2 people start using their cooldowns on that clone, you've created huge value, even though none of these stats have changed for you. You didn't do much more damage, because your clone might die before it gets to them. You're not getting more kill participation, because you didn't hurt the enemy, so you're not going to get credit for kills like that. You're not getting any final hits, because no one dies in this scenario. But because the enemy now have less cooldowns, your team now has an advantage. Maybe you're distracting them, and maybe you're playing Cinch, and you're like taking them from lane A to lane B. Maybe you're making it so your team's now fighting like a 4v2. Maybe you're diving the backline as D.Va, so their healers aren't providing as much healing. Maybe you're giving the enemy team negative stats rather than pumping up your own stats necessarily the same way. So if you're looking at, you know, just damage, participation, and finals won't be shown on Overwatch, but maybe they're providing huge value in other ways. Like, it's definitely possible. And then I want to we went over like damage, distractions. There's like objective time, so if you're on payload for like Overwatch or Rivals, but your team's fighting somewhere else, you're still providing a lot of value even though your stats aren't changing because you're moving the payload, which is game dependent. You have to have at least one person on payload for it to move. Not every game's like that. Many games are. Not every game's necessarily like that. Many games are. And then we could talk, that's mostly about like DPS, but there's also, say, Penny. Penny might not have, you know, insane damage, but Pennies tend to have more finals because they do burst damage with their mines. They don't always have the best participation because their auto attacks are absolutely fucking garbage. They could have a lot of participation, actually. Like, it's relatively common with... Okay, Penny's not a great example of participation, but they don't tend to have the best damage. They tend to have pretty okay or good finals. The Penny could still have really good other value because they can use that net to stop ults. So that Iron Man's... there's an enemy Iron Man, that Penny's tracking their ult, like, mentally, and they use that net to stop that Iron Man ult. That's insane value that won't show up. So there's those 3 teammates, and then you could do, like, the same thing with healer, because healers might have, like, effective healing versus, like, just fucking spam healing. That's kind of garbage. Spam healing would be like if you heal someone for like 100, this is just a random number. If you heal someone for like X amount and then an enemy shoots them in the face and they die in one shot, that healing did absolutely nothing. That did not matter whatsoever. Your stat is higher, but the effectiveness did not change from that. Effective healing would be like if you heal them by 102 and then the enemy shoots them in the face and they live with like 1 or 2 health. That healing was effective. That contributed value. You're good. You're golden. That's amazing. You got value from that. I love this shit. That's phenomenal. Not all healing is the same. Healing can also sometimes not be the greatest if you're like pouring your resources into people and then they push forward because they're like, oh, I have higher health, but then you don't have cooldowns and they die, and it's like, well, just because you're at health doesn't mean it's time to push. You need to wait for your support's cooldowns. Also, it's generally on the support to let, you know, the vanguards or the tanks or whoever know if they have those healing cooldowns. This is also different per game because different games work differently with like heal botting and things like that. In general, supports should do a lot of ult tracking, a lot of dive trafficking, and they should be communicating all of that and their own cooldowns hyper generally to others. They don't have to. It's not like a definite should, but it's really, really good if they do because they're in a really good position to do that. Yeah, it's more of a cultural thing than anything. Anyways, games might track stats that might be misleading. They might not track stats or can't track stats or other things that are representative of value. We're going to backspace all this. It could be that, you know, one person's here, one person's over here, but like they don't see player 2, so they don't see the value of player 2's bringing or like the good that they're doing. And it might be like a timeline where like over here they start doing kind of bad, even though they did really good over here, and they still did pretty good. And, you know, it's other players that like fuck this thing up, or they're not doing something that they could have or should have done that would have prevented the enemy from getting strong enough to do this or whatever the fuck. Like, if someone feeds top lane, and then top lane comes bottom, and then jungle comes bottom, and then it's a fucking 4v2, and then they fucking get dragon, they stomp bot lane, and they take 2 turrets. That's not necessarily bottom feeding. It'd be really, really fucking weird and stupid to say that. But many people do. So we talked about the difference of running it down versus poor performance. We talked about performing well, but not necessarily in a way that is visible. We talked about how throwing is more intentional losing of games, and how things aren't commonly called throwing if there's no intentionality behind it. But many people, or some people, still do try to call it throwing, although that's mostly just like blame and projection rather than actually accusing people of intentionally trying to lose. And different people have different strategies of winning a game. There's also people that feel really entitled to specific performances or things of others. Particularly when it comes to like ranked or like competitive play. Anyways, that's the gist of this video.